More than 1 million people attended a pro-democracy rally in Istanbul on Sunday. It was the first time in years that Turkey's president and prime minister were joined by opposition leaders, all united in denouncing last month's attempted coup. Since then, more than 70,000 people in the military, judiciary, civil service and education have either been arrested, suspended or placed under investigation. And then there's this. Beyond the domestic fallout lies newly strained relations with the United States and a possible rapprochement with Russia. Later, we'll talk with a Turkish journalist, a policy analyst, and an expert on political violence. But we begin in Istanbul with CCTV's Natalie Carney. And Natalie, bring us up to date on the latest from Turkey since that failed coup. What more do we know, and how successful has the Erdogan government been in consolidating its power?
Well, I guess it really depends on which perspective you're looking at all this from. The purges, the detentions and the arrests do continue here. Up to date, we've seen that 16,000 people have been officially arrested. And as of late, the Istanbul Public Prosecutor's Office have issued arrest warrants for 34 members of the Fethullah Gulen network, who the government accuses of being the mastermind of the failed military coup. 15 of these people are already in custody with potential connections to the coup. However, the main reason for their arrest warrants is due to an incident back in January of 2014, one that the government fears of national security. So we are seeing that these sweeps are expanding a little bit more than just to those that the government perceived to be behind the failed coup attempt. So these the perceived excessiveness of all this is worrying many, particularly in the international community, but also because we don't know how successful yet all these purges and all these detentions and all these arrests have been. But I should note that those that have been cleared, the process is continuing. Their jobs have been reinstated. They have, re-entered society as civilians of this country. As far as the consolidation of power, there's no doubt that Erdogan has been able to soften some of the opposition voices in the country through all this process and has been able to consolidate some power, particularly with the armed forces. But it's definitely worth noting and stressing that this consolidation of power really has been able to substantially lessen the influence of the Gulen network here in Turkey and the threat that it poses and has posed to this country for many, many years. And this is something that the West, many people here feel, is not fully appreciative of. And also, too, even prior to the coup, there was a lot of support for Erdogan taking more power simply to get things done in the country. The parliament was so divided on issues that nothing was really getting passed. So there is a lot of support. While it might look excessive again to the West, there's a lot of support domestically here for the measures that the government is taking to crack down on this Gulenist network that it deems a quote-unquote cancer to the country.
Now, Natalie, the other significant development on Tuesday, President Erdogan traveled to St. Petersburg to meet with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. And this comes at a time, after Turkey shot down that Russian jet near the Syrian border back in November. So with this meeting now, have these two countries effectively mended ties?
Well, they've definitely agreed to work together towards reinstating their pre-crisis relationship, that be economically, that be politically, in every sphere that they did work prior to the crisis in November when Turkey shot down a Russian jet over its border with Syria. But this does come at a very convenient time politically, of course, as Turkey's relationship with the West is deteriorating, for one, over the West's post-coup response, as well as the U.S.'s delay in extraditing Gulen, and even before that, with its relations with the EU over the refugee deal. So it does come at a very convenient time for both Ankara and Moscow. But there's also the economic aspect that is substantially beneficial for Turkey. Turkey's economy was quite damaged by the sanctions placed upon it by Russia. The coup, for instance, as well, cost the country, some economists are saying, saying upwards of $100 billion US. So this is great that Turkey is going to be able to sort of refill its budget, so to speak, going forward with these renewed economic ties with Russia. Some economists are saying that Turkey could gain upwards of $10 billion US in the next 2 years by reinstating these relations. The two leaders have also pledged to reinstate their trade target of $100 billion US. So all this makes for good news for Turkey.
Thanks, Natalie. That's CCTV's Natalie Carney reporting from Istanbul. Joining us from Moscow to talk about the situation in Turkey is Alexey Khlebnikov. He's a senior editor with Russia Direct, a publication offering analysis and perspective on international issues. With us here in Washington is Mustafa Gurbuz. He's a political sociologist and the author of a new book, Rival Kurdish Movements in Turkey. And joining us from Istanbul is a journalist and commentator with the Daily Sabah, Zeynep Jane Kandur. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Zeynep, let me start with you, and let's start with the events of this past weekend. There was a major demonstration in Turkey, in Istanbul, more than 1 million people. It included the president, the prime minister, even opposition members were in that demonstration. Has the attempted coup actually had the effect of uniting Turks?
It was very surprising that a coup had the effect of uniting Turks. I think it was a great benefit from the coup. We mustn't underplay the fact that over 200 people died, thousands were injured. But the fact that the country came together to thwart the coup and continue to come together to stand off any attempts to upset the democratic traditions of the country is very important. You said over 1 million. It was recorded it was over 5 million people that day. Actually, over 8 million people tried to get into the square, but 2 million weren't able to and were turned back. People were on boats because the boats were unable to dock. So it was a huge turnout. The opposition leaders and the president and the prime minister all coming together and giving messages of unity, all being equally cheered by all members of society. It was a very, very important day, a red letter day for Turkey, I would say.
Right, Mustafa, so we have this huge demonstration in Turkey in support of democracy in the country. At the same time, the government has launched something of a crackdown in Turkey. More than 70,000 people have been arrested or are under investigation right now. The president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is talking of reintroducing the death penalty. Is the government here using the coup as an attempt to crack down on all forms of dissent in Turkey?
Well, that's the worry, actually, and it was from the very moment the July 15 coup attempt was making Mr. Erdogan's according to some, a march toward one-man rule in Turkey, undermining checks and balances. Of course, winning over the coup attempt is a great deal for the Turkish democracy, but also Turkish democracy would be about the journalists and academics and others now suffering under the emergency laws that we would see in Turkey after the successful coups. Like we can compare the numbers. Even the numbers are comparable after weeks after the 1980 coup. So if it would be a successful coup, what would be the outcome? Yes, it would be a disaster. But if under such conditions, we are discussing about the rights of academics, rights of journalists, and rights of teachers. There are 20,000 people in the ministry, only the Ministry of Education. So we have big questions about the Mr. Erdogan's ambition to become the executive president of Turkey.
Zeynep, that's an important point that Mustafa raises here, and that is the motive behind what the president is doing. Is he ambitious? Is he trying to stamp out all dissent, opposition in Turkey?
First of all, I think to just talk about the president in this situation is awfully reductionist. There is a government in Turkey. It is the government and the president together who declared the state of emergency. Any country which has a coup, which injures thousands and kills hundreds, which attempts to assassinate the president, drop bombs on the parliament, is well within its rights and actually should declare a state of emergency. The academics that are being suspended. First of all, they're being suspended with 2/3 of their pay. So this is something that's often overlooked. It is terribly worrying, of course, when there's any restriction on freedoms. But if these academics are linked in any way to the coup, which is what is being discovered through evidence, then they must be removed from their positions. Because as we know from the West, academics, if they're not serving the purpose of greater knowledge and teaching and seeking greater information, but are rather working to radicalize youth, then that's a very dangerous thing. And this is something that all academics are taking on seriously. There have been many letters written to the West by academics who have been suspended or not suspended, saying that they support this effort, in that they want academia to be the place that it should be, a place of learning and education. The state of emergency is absolutely necessary in Turkey until all the people who are linked to the coup attempts are found.
Yeah, I guess the question is, who determines whether academics are radicalizing youth? I mean, there should be a court system that should charge people who are breaking the law.
There is a court. The people who are being suspended will be those who are. Many have been reappointed. Some have been arrested. Those who have been arrested will be put on trial. There are many commissions who are watching the process. There are commissions from the main opposition parties. There are commissions within the AK Party itself. There are commissions within the government, and there are human rights commissions, which are all watching this process. It is not just one person deciding who is being suspended.
Okay, let me bring Alexey in from Moscow. Alexey, of course, lots of changes taking place in Turkey, and another one of these fast-moving changes in Turkey is the normalization of relations between Russia and Turkey. You know, initially there was a war of words between Russia and Turkey after that Russian jet was downed near the Syrian border by Turkish fighter jets. But now President Erdogan has held a meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. They appear to have patched up their differences. What do you make of the timing of this meeting?
The timing is pretty telling, because firstly it happens against the worsening relations between Turkey and the West. Firstly because of Turkish policy in Syria and their bombings of Kurds, which are supported by the United States, and of course the harsh crackdown against those who was behind the failed coup attempt. So basically this meeting in St. Petersburg kind of showing to the West that both Turkey and Russia have alternative paths to go with. So that's kind of very telling in such context.
Zeynep, what do you make of the meeting between the Turks and the Russians at this time?
I think that the meeting actually was being discussed before the coup attempt was made. There was a letter written to Putin, and there was discussion about having a meeting. The fact that Vladimir Putin rang up immediately after the coup attempt to condemn it is very telling. The problem that Turkey has with the West is not due to anything to do with the Kurds or a so-called harsh crackdown, which I totally disagree with. It's more to do with the way that many Western states dragged their feet, were half-hearted in condemning the coup. And this is not so much on the part of the government, but on the people, the part of the people. The Turkish people are extremely upset about this. They were able to reach their own conclusions. There are many things on the night that were televised from Western media outlets that have upset the Turkish people.